So Japan's invasion of French Indochina actually kind of helped lead to what we see as Vietnam today. I mean, we're talking the North and South Vietnam and the Vietnamese War that the US fought in, and it's kind of a weird domino effect in history that something that happened in World War II would go on to affect something 30 years later. And it's weird, but we're going to talk about it real quick. So Japan and China are fighting currently, and it's 1940. They've been fighting for a couple of years at this point. Japan is kind of steamrolling their way through China, but China is still getting pretty consistent supplies from France in French Indochina or Vietnam. And I'm probably just going to continue using Vietnam for the rest of the video to make it easier. Now, with the Chinese getting supplies from Vietnam right now, Japan wants to cut that supply line completely. And it's understandable why. They also want to take part of Vietnam so that they can invade the Dutch Indies and just start their island hopping when in World War II that we would later see as they continued their way and, you know, hit the Philippines and took over Indonesia and everything. But Japan would want to take part of it. They wanted to take an airfield and a harbor and station troops in Vietnam to make it easier and to control the supply lines heading into China. Now, it wouldn't really happen immediately though. There would be negotiations between France and Japan, and they would go back and forth for months on end, because France didn't really want the occupation of Japan, but they also knew that they couldn't fight Japan. They had troops in Vietnam, but they weren't well trained. They were very ill-equipped to take on the Japanese Empire at this time, which was kind of just surprising the whole world with how good they were at combat right now, because nobody had really seen this side of Japan. But they would kind of try to negotiate, like Japan would say 25,000 troops and we want control of one harbor in Vietnam. And then France would be like, no, we'll stop the supplies, but you're only allowed 6,000 troops in Vietnam. And they would just go back and forth on this. Eventually, the negotiations would just fall flat. And a few hours before the end of the negotiation time, Japan would just invade northern Vietnam. They're like, if you're not going to give it to us, then we're just going to take what we wanted to begin with. So they would take like almost the northern half of Vietnam within just a couple of days. Like, France would kind of try to put up a fight, but 4,500 Japanese troops and many armored vehicles would just start storming the beaches up into Vietnam through their own harbors, and then a couple thousand troops would come in from the border with China, and they would just surround the Lang Sung area and a couple of the other cities in that area and just stop the French from actually putting up a fight. So they would just occupy that part. Now, they still let France have a hold on Vietnam. Any part that wasn't controlled by Japan, they would still have their civil administration there, and they'd still have some control in that area, because Japan didn't really want full control, at least at that point in time, because they just wanted to use it to cut the supplies and to be able to move troops out easier. Now, they wanted more of Vietnam a year later in 1941, as they would then make their way across and into southern Vietnam. And it was a massive invasion force. The first invasion force was only a few thousand troops and some armor. This invasion force was 140,000 Japanese troops heading straight down Vietnam, looking to take all of it so that they could then have an easier time taking the Dutch East Indies and continuing their campaign further south. So France again, didn't put up a fight. You can't. You know, Japan was still the superior military at this point in time. So they wouldn't put up a fight, and French troops and the civil administration would still just be allowed to remain, but underneath Japanese supervision this time. And so it would just be Japan's occupation of Vietnam, but it wouldn't be permanent. That Japan would get rid of their occupation. They would pull out of Vietnam at the end of World War II. But here's how it leads a little bit into the ongoing conflicts in Vietnam after World War II, because France would regain control of it. But Japan having control of Vietnam, and you know what they're well known for at this point in the war. They are very well known for having poor, let's say, ethics when it comes to taking over territory. They're not really good at controlling the people. I mean, we've seen it before. Many war crimes committed by Japan as they would take over these nations one by one, and we saw it a lot in China, and we'd see it in the Philippines and their treatment of POWs from World War II. Like, they're not very good at it. And the same thing would go in Vietnam. It's not really well reported, but it is said that Japan treated Vietnamese civilians very poorly, and they did not take care of this country at all, which would actually lead to a famine in Vietnam. Now, with this though, Japan also sparked a little bit of rebellion in Vietnam because they saw what France did. They saw France did not put up a fight to protect Vietnam from an outside force. France is not doing what a colonial empire should be doing, and that is protecting what it took. You know, I mean, it's fine if you're going to take over my country and take my civilians, because I can't fight against you. You're an overwhelming empire. If you're going to take them, can you at least protect them and ensure that we have a good economy and a good government? You know, that's kind of what you're supposed to do. But Japan kind of just took it all from France, and France was like, here, you have it. We can't fight you. And that didn't sit well with Vietnamese people. So it sparked a little bit of rebellion after this, and that's what would lead to the first of a couple kind of civil wars between France and the Vietnamese people. And that's kind of how you got the division between North and South Vietnam right after World War II, is because of these first Indochina War against French rule in 1946. And then of course you would have the North and the South Vietnam War later on in the 60s and 70s because of communism and the fact that they wanted to unify underneath one government later. I mean, there's a few other factors in these Vietnam Wars. That's kind of just the gist of it. But it was just kind of weird to me to see an early domino effect like this. Like, I was kind of just looking for, when was Japan really fighting the Allies? Like, I knew Japan started fighting the Allies at Pearl Harbor, and that's kind of when they would officially enter World War II. But wanted to see if there was a different account somewhere else. And Japan versus France, although not really a fight, kind of sparked my interest. And this was just a really oversimplified version of it, because it's a lot of political stuff that I do understand, but not to the fullest extent, and didn't really want to go into great detail on. So this was just a summarized version of what would happen in Vietnam at the time. If you guys enjoyed the video, make sure you like and subscribe. If you have suggestions for future content, leave a comment down below. I mean, I would love to learn something new, and I would like to teach you guys something new at the same time. And I'll see you guys in my next video.